This is the really rather stunning new Chevy Cruze hatchback. It joins a sedan that has been around in most of the world for about a year. And it'll chase the Hyundai i30, Kia Cee'd, and Škoda Octavia with renewed vengeance. You'd have a more precise experience driving an Octavia. Though aging, it continues to benefit from the VW Group's attention to detail in its cabin fit and finish, and from Volkswagen's light, precise manual gearboxes of recent. But the Škoda would be crashy over poor roads, and you'd crash more comfortably in a Cruze, thanks to a structure which, with 65% high-strength steel, GM promises is stiffer than the Golf's, and rather stiffer still than the old Golf on which the Octavia is based. The Cruze shares its underpinnings with Opel's Astra. The Astra does battle with the Golf and Focus. The Chevy undercuts those rivals' prices in Europe by a useful 20%. While it lacks their finesse, it is a competent, if not engaging, partner in a corner. Diesel models are heavier and cause a bit of rolling and rocking in a car whose body control is correct rather than inspiring, much like the design of the start-stop button you press to get it going. But there's that ride quality, by far the best among Europe's bargain basement cars. Though the Cruze has sharper steering, Hyundai's i30 turns in slightly more enthusiastically. But it can't match the Cruze for comfort, and the Kia Cee'd is firmer still. And the Cruze beats the Koreans for standard equipment. 340,000 have been sold in more than 60 countries. But up until now, there's been no Cruze hatchback. Which is a surprise, not only because hatchbacks account for 65% of volume among compacts in Europe, but also when you look at what they've been able to put together. The Kia Cee'd has all the presence of white goods, but next to the five-door Cruze, it's positively anodyne. Sedans are what sell in Russia, Chevrolet's largest market in Europe. Indeed, Eastern Europe, like China and India, where the Cruze is also sold, tends to view sedans as more prestigious than hatchbacks. They like this car in emerging markets. Auto journalists from 15 countries in Central and Eastern Europe voted it Auto Best 2010, that region's equivalent of the European Car of the Year award. Like Russia, China, and India, Chevrolet's home market prefers sedans to hatchbacks, and America is where the Cruze is going next. General Motors, like other automakers, figures that Americans are looking to downsize, not only from SUVs, but midsize cars too. Midsize cars made up 16% of America's market in the first half of 2010, and compacts were right behind at 15%. So, roughly a year on, while Europe finally gets the five-door Cruze, America is about to get its first taste of the original, with a few tweaks. 50 years ago, Chevrolet launched a compact to battle the imports. The Corvair was innovative and stylish beyond its station, and Europe copied its lines and detailing slavishly. But then a man with no driver's license knocked its handling. And 10 years later, the Vega had an interesting aluminum engine, which proved desperately unreliable. GM design head Ed Welburn recently mused upon how Chevrolet once had an emotional connection with its buyers. Then, he said, we lost it. GM's Detroit home base came to look upon small cars as necessary evils, driven by those who had no choice. They couldn't tell the difference, or so Detroit thought, between a mediocre car and a good one. And even if they could, why try when they couldn't pay for it? Cars like the Chevette and Cavalier, the compacts which followed Corvair and Vega, were desperately uninspiring to behold and mostly to drive. In 2004, GM's home base, which had over a 40-year period effectively proved itself for one reason or another inept at small cars, turned to its Opel affiliate in Rüsselsheim, Germany. The compact Cobalt finally did away with the last vestiges of the Cavalier's 25-year-old platform. Inside, it was clear that GM had looked closely at the fourth-generation Volkswagen's Golf and Jetta. But Philip Zach's rational lines were too antiseptic to generate the emotional draw Chevrolet wanted to recapture. Sure, people don't buy Corollas for their styling, but Toyota had built a name for itself in other areas, while Chevrolet still seemed half-hearted. Under pressure from taxpayers at home and building a name for itself abroad since it in 2005 became a global brand, Chevy had more soul-searching to do. Once again, Detroit turned abroad. Opel finessed the Cobalt's platform further and sent it to Bupyeong and Incheon in South Korea. The Koreans and the Australians also build the car. Taiwan Kim's Cruze is anything but evolutionary. His team showed the dramatic Ultra concept at Paris 2006 and channeled the production Cruze from it. All at once, it looks more purposeful and aggressive than the Cobalt ever did, to say nothing of the Cee'd, Cruze's spiritual predecessor in the rest of the world. Up front, things are more deliberate than delicate, in true American brash style, with a large front grille, aggressive slants in the headlamp frames, and a fender arch parallel to the front wheel arches, in what is one of the more original aspects of this car's design. Origami-like in its surfacing, the hood bulges outward, inviting a guess as to the power within. Cruze appears larger than it is, thanks to those elongated headlights, which add width, and to a three-window design, which adds length. It was surprising at launch to see such a steeply raked roof on a compact, practical car, but four-door coupes were and are all the rage, and here the arch is gentle, melding into the short deck with deliberate delicacy. Suffice it to say that the Cruze's packaging is good, making for excellent interior space and a capacious trunk, although up front the need to shoe in VM Motori diesel engines has made for a longish front overhang. At the rear, though, things go awry. Meek and generic, this could be a Honda Civic sedan, which is why the hatchback is such a refreshing surprise. Now, roughly a year after it first went on sale, the Cruze sedan has launched in America. The split grille mirrors that of the larger Malibu and Tahoe, and it would appear that Chevrolet has found its own style again, and one that, up front at least, is less apologetic. GM does not hide the Cruze's parentage, explaining how important it is to leverage global resources. To be fair, too, the company spent $350 million upgrading the Lordstown, Ohio plant, which will put the Cruze together. They'll need that investment to keep the body panels within 3 millimeters of each other, a key factor in a better-looking new car, and one that feels solid for years to come. Lordstown has added another shift and 1,200 welcome jobs. And in a city which 20 years ago Michael Moore raked GM over the coals for abandoning, the Flint Engine South plant got $202 million to build the 1.4-liter motor. Somewhat tongue-in-cheek, Chevy also explains that the Cruze is the quintessential American thing to do. Take the best the world has to offer and put it all into one inspiring package. Throw in a Tim Allen voiceover in the ads and Middle America will never know the difference. American buyers will, however, find a much better, more complete small car than they've been led to expect from Chevrolet over the years. But in addition to giving GM a chance, they'll need to get over two things to find it. First, the Cruze does not undercut its competition in price. Sure, it's just 13% higher than the Cobalt's MSRP, but that's enough to push it toward the upper end of the segment. And second, they'll need to look past the base model and past any prejudices against small engines. The larger 1.8-liter engine has been underwhelming in Europe. Peak torque in a Cruze 1.8 arrives at 3,800 RPM, and that's more than 2,000 RPM higher than in a 1.4-liter turbocharged Škoda Octavia. And the Cruze is nothing like as fun to rev as a Mazda 3 1.6, which is slower but feels far more athletic. At Chevrolet, they're not worried because they figure that 70% of American buyers will opt for the more expensive but smaller engine. It measures just 1.4 liters in displacement, making it rather smaller than the 2.2-liter motor in the Cobalt and far smaller than anything Americans could have imagined just 6 years ago, before gas prices shot up. Ironically, it's not available in the European Cruze yet, but that's because its turbocharging makes it more expensive. And in markets outside of America, the Cruze is pitched as an econobox. It's a great engine with good punch at low RPMs and good fuel economy. Unfortunately, unless you opt for the handicapped Eco model, you're stuck with the 6-speed automatic, which intrudes constantly. Chevy is advertising this car in more is better terms, but at least in the case of the Autobox, there are too many gears fighting with each other. A dual-clutch transmission, it is not. To create the 6-speed manual Eco Cruze, Chevy takes the 1.4-liter model and throws out the spare tire, and the Z-Link, which makes the American version of this car rather better than it is in the rest of the world. In Europe, the Cruze has a plain torsion beam. In America, where the Cruze is to do battle with the Focus in the Gulf, it gets the Z-Link rear from its Opel Astra sister. This adds a Watts linkage to the trailing twist beam. The Watts consists of two horizontal bars with a central pivot, effectively a central tube that's welded between the pair of semi-trailing arms. It helps to keep the back end straight. It allows for the separation of lateral and vertical movements in the rear suspension. The Watts linkage itself locates the axle laterally, and the tube can be rotated to alter the rear suspension tuning. Link and beam are tuned separately, dialing in a smooth ride without sacrificing handling. Crucially, the rear bushings don't have to serve double duty, meaning they do a much better job at providing an adequate ride. The European Cruze rides well, and the American Cruze with the Z-Link rides better still. And it's more involving too, because the rear suspension participates rather than simply obeying commands from the front. Cruze grips well, and although body control is solid rather than inspiring, the steering is sharp thanks to GM going the extra mile and opting to use a ZF steering rack with electric power steering assist acting directly on it rather than atop the steering column. But ditching the Z-Link saves 250 pounds and gives the Eco Cruze a 40 mile per gallon highway rating. Saving weight for fuel economy is a noble goal. Chevy even talks of the lighter neodymium magnets used in the speakers. But the Eco Cruze suffers more rear impact harshness due to the stiffer rear suspension bushings, which must compensate for the lack of the Watts linkage. Direct injection would have made more sense. Then again, Prius drivers have long battled a torsion beam without complaint. And the Eco model does have one trick. An electric motor is connected to the fascia shutters, which close automatically at 37 miles an hour and reopen at 34. When closed, there is a 1600ths improvement in the coefficient of drag. It's not much, but it is the difference between getting 39 miles to the gallon on the highway and 40, a chasm in marketing terms. Other models offer competitive, if not stunning, fuel economy figures. The American market Cruze gets 10 airbags, an acoustic laminated windshield, and more insulation. Inside, it looks richer than it is, thanks to contemporary design and a few piano black and fabric inserts. Although the busy mix of colors and textures is in vibrant contrast to, say, a Peugeot 308, or more realistically, a Škoda Octavia. Some will find it less sophisticated, others more interesting. And as in Kia's Cee'd, the neon instrumentation, here blue LEDs, seems a bit overzealous, but it's well put together, with most panels fitting to within a millimeter, while at the corners the doors and dashboard are promised to come together to within 5. There are bigger wheels, too, which give the American model an even wider stance. The largest 18-inch wheels are offered on the LTZ, which gains sport suspension, placing the Cruze 10 millimeters closer to the ground than the standard setup, with 15% higher spring rates and different calibrations to the shocks and steering. But there's room to play with it. Over in Europe, the Ernscher Chevrolet Cruze Bumblebee drops the car by 30 millimeters. For something more covert, there's Cruze by H&R, which does the same. No SS version of the Cruze is forthcoming, says GM. Chevrolet expects a third of Cruze intenders to be used car buyers. A third will be replacing their compact car. The other third are moving down from an SUV. GM is confident it's encouraging its 3,000 Chevy dealers to have a Corolla and Civic on site. Retiring Vice Chairman Bob Lutz liked to say that the Cruze was the first time GM had taken small cars seriously. In Cruze's first year, Chevy accounted for 44% of GM's global sales and saw a sales increase of 21% over 2008 in a very difficult market. Counting all its variants, including the Daewoo, Buick, and Holden versions sold across Asia and Australia, the Cruze is eventually expected to hit 1 million annual sales. For 2010, looking at the Cruze hatchback, one might add that this is the first time Chevrolet has taken Europe seriously. The Cruze recently surpassed the middling Aveo as Chevrolet's top-selling passenger car nameplate. But not until this new set of pictures did it occur that perhaps the US brand might be serious about the European market. The hatchback, incidentally, was designed by Holden's Port Melbourne studio in Australia. With the loss of Saab, GM's efforts in Europe can be focused on Opel, Vauxhall, and Chevy. These days, Chevrolet sells 3.5 million cars per year in over 130 countries. It's not at all clear whether today's Chevy is a bargain basement brand, as in Europe, or a competitor to Volkswagen, as in America. But wherever you are in the world, the Cruze does offer you more than you'd expect. And after a torrid last few years in Detroit, that's a reasonable proposition.